You are, I believe, final speaker. Am I correct, Nate? It happens to be a dear friend of mine, Shannon Lewis, who is a former ICU nurse, but currently a queer healthcare strategist. And a little bit of background on our relationship. We actually worked at the same company, but at completely different points in time. And so there was no overlap, but there was just something that had always really resonated with me about Shannon and everything that she was posting online. I did stalk her a little bit because it's just there seemed like there were so many overlapping points, and I was really excited to have her jump on. As I kind of shared with you all a little bit earlier, I come from the biotech world and the scientific side of things, and I thought that Shannon would bring a really powerful kind of message and perspective to the entire conversation. So thank you, Shannon, for last minute joining us. It was my fault 100% for making this last minute, but please.
I am so happy to be part of it. I wish that I could have joined earlier. I've been kind of I'm was home with my kiddo for the day, and he had plans for big play dates. So I was trying to get over to you guys. I'm just so glad that I found this group and connected with you, Dana, and have a chance to. I mean, I just looking at the screen that you shared, Nate, earlier with all the different topics. I wrote down like 5 or 6 things about just, Courtney, as you said, big girl thoughts, right? So just the different thoughts that I had, you know, um, about this community and really just in research in general and kind of the different challenges that we have, right? Just going from, data, you guys were talking about data and the different pronouns that are utilized and creating different record systems. And so I yes, I'm glad that I had a chance to connect. So, a little bit on my background. So, I was a CV nurse. I'm still a nurse, but I no longer work at bedside. I moved from nursing to biotech and working in the business development field in a pretty niche area. So, what we do, or what I've been doing for the past 10 years, is really working with pharma and researchers in that preclinical space. So before, somebody is enrolled in clinical trial, typically researchers and pharma companies are testing their drug targets on cells or, maybe even different biomarkers, but maybe they'll collect blood, maybe they'll collect, saliva, and they're trying to determine how their drug is going to work in a clinical trial sense, if it's going to be helpful for patient communities. And so what I do is I work with researchers from the pharma industry, as well as from the diagnostic community. And we're really trying to match make, for lack of a better word, between the patient communities and these studies that they're trying to set up. And hopefully they are successful and are able to develop something that will go to clinical trial. I will say that by and large, most of them do not. And we have a extreme challenge in getting patients that meet inclusion criteria for the studies that they set up. So, Courtney, you were talking earlier about, the fact that some of these studies are not, working with, they're not accepting people with certain comorbidities. I worked at a company that had a boilerplate for, that they don't want comorbidities. They just want this primary diagnosis, and they're not going to take anyone with a comorbidity. And it was really a study, just kind of as a example, was extremely stalled and not collecting. And everyone who was on the collection side of things had this understanding that comorbidities would not be accepted by the researcher, but it was a lack of communication that this boilerplate terminology just carried over into this inclusion criteria. And the researchers thinking, oh, I'm fine with certain comorbidities. There's some that might, interfere with these biomarkers, and I can tell you what they are, but they were, let's just say that the criteria was opened up quite a bit and that study started going. So I think that having these conversations across the community is very helpful, because we often, I think that, studies are set up and they're not meaning to have such strict criteria. Maybe the researchers are leaning towards the companies that they work with to have this already set up for them, and they don't have the knowledge to sit down and go line by line on what's going to be acceptable, what's not going to be acceptable. If we're not getting patients enrolled within X period of time, are we just going to let it sit, theoretically on the shelf, or are we going to try to change things a little bit so that we're able to move the needle and go further? So that that was just I don't know if that sparks conversation between the team, but I wanted to share that kind of as a case study and also talk about kind of my personal story. So I am from Huntsville, Alabama. So I don't know if anyone here is in the South, but that's where I'm located with my wife and my son. So my wife is trans. We identify as lesbians, and we are in the great state of Alabama together. So we don't really have, we're often told by folks that, people are fine with the gay thing, just talking from Alabama slang here, but they just don't want to have to see it. But from, where we live and where we're at with our family, it's kind of evident. And so we try to live authentically, right? You have to have a very strong backbone, I think. And we have a very good support system, but it has been a scary time. So, Daniel, when you were talking about protection of data, so this is something that we went through very recently with the new administration, for example. We even talked about, are we going to put online that we're from Alabama, or that we, what our pronouns are, or, what our identity is, or anything like that. Should we, even have a social media profile? And that's even without, just thinking about our healthcare data that may or may not be out there and in various hands of politicians. So coming from the community where I'm at, I do have I'd say, very strong sense to protect that information. And I think that companies that are trying to work with patients and trying to recruit, they're in that double-edged sword where, they want to have access to that information and be able to match make you and pair you up with studies. And they want to kind of find a way to share that information with pharma, right? And in an anonymous way. But how do we ensure that they are good caretakers of this information? What information should be shared, what information should not be shared? Those are some things that interest me as a kind of like a side topic. I also I put in that I was in Cap and Claw, so I did start a publishing house where I'm hoping to give platform for indie authors that are in the queer space and other minority groups that just might not feel like their stories in the fiction world have a platform to be told, or that people might not be interested in them. I feel like there is a gaping hole in, I guess, voices in that space. So people that want to share, a queer story, or that identify as LGBTQ and feel like they don't have a spot to be published, or that people wouldn't be interested in their story. So that's kind of a side project as well that I'm working on. Anything thought provoking on that? Or, I mean, Courtney, I would love to talk a little bit more about, what you were saying with the inclusion data and, kind of like your experiences on these trials, or what you think about trials. What other shortcomings have you noticed?
I also, sorry, Courtney, I'm gonna let you go real quick, but I did want to just selfishly plug a couple writers in this chat. I know
Yes.
some writers in here who write things. So yeah, I'll let them share more about that. But go ahead, Courtney.
I honestly don't have too much to share. I think that's really interesting and helpful also about the idea of boilerplate language and like the sense that like we're all strapped, we're all overwhelmed all the time. So if you're using the boilerplate language when you're actually okay with certain comorbidities, you're having to go back and potentially revise the study. I think potentially it brings up like, have you seen more success for trials that have patients included from before the trial actually starts? Like if patients themselves are like looking over inclusion criteria, for example, do you tend to see more successful outcomes?
So, I mean, I think it's a chicken and egg situation. So, in the realm of where, the businesses that I've worked with start, they have patients within their network, and they might say, this person has been enrolled in such a trial in the past, or that we know that they're in our database with a primary diagnosis, but they won't just there. There hasn't been a place where I have worked where patients are able to interact and see studies live in real time and say, I think I meet this criteria so far, and I'd like to interact with it. That is definitely a huge discussion in the community right now. It's been so segmented, right? Because I think, too, I mean, you have to be very careful with your data. Like, I could not condone to anyone, or put advice out there of like what types of communities where you can freely just share that type of medical information without being extremely cautious, right? And so with every place that I've worked at, those communities have been closed, and we are in the process of matchmaking for them. No one has that direct line of sight. And at a clinical trial level, it would have that direct line of sight to say, this is what this clinical trial is about, and you have a lot more information on it. But in that preclinical level, really, when they're working with those biomarkers, it's that, for lack of a better word, matchmaking service, to where you're hoping that somebody, is able to see your story from just snippets on the screen, that you are aligned with what they need.
I think something that I've also experienced a lot, like working at that connecting point between researchers and potential participants for any phase of research as a whole, is, I mean, I can't even tell you how many times where all I'm asking of a pharma company to be able to connect them with the right group and everything is, I have your permission to share your name and a brief research purpose? And when I say a brief research purpose, I mean all you have to say is looking to gain further insights to better support biomarker development or therapeutic development as a whole. It can be so generic, but just something that is not, it doesn't just sound like, oh, Pfizer's knocking on my door again, looking for more information from me. Like, build the trust with that community. And you'd be amazed at how often they're unwilling to do that. And the primary reason for it is actually because of the dog eat dog world of pharma, where they don't want their investigations to be exposed because there's concern that a competitor could pick up on it very quickly and then everything breaks loose. Maybe they beat them to market, whatever the case may be. But in my experience, in my tagline, talking to a lot of the researchers, is you can do well by doing good. And what I mean by that is I find it really fascinating how limiting IE criteria can be sometimes. And Shannon, to what you were saying before of like the boilerplate and not even having that conversation of, would you be okay with including XYZ things? That's a lack of, you know, thoroughness, I guess, on our end, right? As potentially a contract research organization, to just, you're really trying to close that project as quickly as you can. Have you really seen what you can do to expand it so that it's less, or it's more accessible to a wide variety of people? And I say the same thing to researchers that might be on the very brink of going to a clinical trial. And my conversation with them is always, hey, this is a disease, and your IE criteria confines it to about 2% of that disease population. Why are you addressing a 2% of that market when we could have been doing for the past 10 years that you've been investigating this? Because I don't think people really understand how much preclinical work goes into it. Like, some of these things have been in development for 10, 15 years. My One of the craziest things about COVID, in my opinion, was that people finally became aware of the actual timeline of vaccines. And they were horrified by how long it took. And I said, it's how it's gone, you know? And so with all that being said, I have personally found that there is power in building that trust ahead of time, because if there's a positive association, I think it's very fair to say at this point in time that the general population has a lot of mistrust in large pharma, and for oftentimes very valid reasons. And so it becomes pharma's responsibility to regain that trust. It can be in a variety of different ways, whether it's just letting the community know what you're looking for, that you're on their side and willing to listen to their stories, to their community, which, that's not a big ask, right? It doesn't feel like a big ask, but there's so many, I would say, more corporate problems that get in the way of it. And so I think that that's where, honestly, Shannon and I's jobs today come into play, is trying to break down that boundary of explaining to these people, hey, you don't even have to tell us what the biomarker that you're investigating is. That doesn't need to be thing, but just something tangible that tells us we're looking into this specific reference point, whether that's a biomarker, whether that's an immunological response to something, what you're investigating and what your desired outcome is. Because as long as you're transparent, but still being mindful of who it's going to and where it might be disseminated to further, you can build trust and still be effective. And then the last thing that I always hate is, say it's Pfizer or Moderna, they come out with a drug and it's for a community, and that community has every right to say, we didn't know that you've been looking into this for the past 10 years. Like, why should I buy into this story? Like, did you talk to any one of us? Because I'm talking to my community and none of us knew that this was coming about. And now you're asking all of us to participate in a clinical trial. So, where were we when you were coming up with this idea? Did you even determine if this was something that we need? Is this relevant for our condition? And really listening to our fears, our concerns, and what we're actually looking for in terms of a therapeutic, which, oh my gosh, if they actually developed drugs that were built for these communities, they would be more successful. No? Like that's why I always say you can do well by doing good. It's such a broken system for so many reasons, and I don't know where that breaking point really came. But I think it's just because there's a lack of communication across all the key stakeholders, and for whatever reason, patients were taken out of that stakeholder position far too long ago and were never brought back in the appropriate manner. And that's what we really need to do from across all different communities and how they engage with research and clinical trials.
I will say, echoing on to that, a lot of the trials are thinking not necessarily from a patient standpoint always, which is sad to say, but they're wondering, what's the FDA going to say back to me? Right? And so they might think, well, Courtney, you use the word variables. Like, I want to get rid of as many variables as possible. So I'm going to exclude as much as I can just to go ahead and like bake that, already into my study that these variables have been accounted for, which is great. That's scientifically sound. It's just not realistic. And so I also put a lot back onto the FDA to say that, we're trying our best from like a patient community standpoint, from, outreach standpoint, from, CRO standpoint in the preclinical space, but like the FDA also has to get really involved with, I think, these patient communities more so than they have, to say, we're not trying to, stifle, preclinical progress, because it's already a monumental, I hate to think about things in terms of money, but it's a monumental task to take something from point A all the way through to clinical trial, right? So from that very early phase. And I think so many people and researchers and scientists are a bit gun shy to have wasted any amount of time or money to A, not get to where they think they're supposed to go, or B, get told that they have to redo something from an FDA standpoint. And they're trying to double dip as much as possible. And that goes, I could spend a crazy amount of time talking about just, how much people need funding in that space of, they're trying to double dip for multiple studies. They're trying to double dip for multiple phases. And I don't know that it's going to get any better. Like, I wish I could say that it is, but it is, it is a conversation that I'm glad that we are having here as a community. And I think that, everyone here is a thought leader in the space to say, I have the agency to go talk to people that are, interested in rare diseases, that may be working in the FDA, or that I know are in that preclinical and CRO space, that, post out there that they're, doing something for rare diseases. I think that connecting with them and asking them, just kind of point blank, what does that mean? Right? How are you guys doing that? How do you engage this community? Because I think that I want to see a future where more drugs are being developed that actually help people, and it's not, you know, just something to add to somebody's list that's not going to be effective, right?
That's so incredibly helpful. I'm so glad you're here. That was like just a wonderful like set of information all at once. I just want to underscore for like Nate, either the list or like maybe outside the list because it feels somewhat secondary to like the sheer horrors of right now. Um, but it strikes me that so much of what you're saying about the FDA, like in some ways, this is always the problem, but you kind of need to get like folks from the FDA, folks from like R&D and patient advocates all in the same room. And like that feels like an obvious ongoing existential problem. But knowing that there's some form of federal advocacy that can be done with the FDA also about some of these criteria, especially when it comes to like patient inclusion and like what it is actually like to live with a rare disease and what rare disease communities actually want measured versus like what the FDA is saying it wants measured and where that doesn't align. So something about that as an advocacy opportunity, like on the federal level.
So I'll jump in and add that I'm on the FDA like patient engagement collaborative, and I will bring this list to them and make sure that we actually talk about this stuff.
Oh, I love that. This is a good group of people right here.
Yeah,
I
it's
forgot you
a little
recently started
song.
doing that because I feel like every time I see any cool project, you're somehow involved with it, and I don't know how you sleep, but I have to say, like, huge congrats. Congrats to the FDA for having you, but also congrats to you. That's awesome.
Yeah, congrats to the FDA for real, for real. Courtney, I do like that idea of making that one of our things. Dana also mentioned something for us to do. Um, Carter's taking notes, so all these ideas are lovely, and I love you guys for sharing them with us. And hopefully we can all, like I said earlier, put our heads together and see how we can manifest these things into reality. Um, yeah, I wanted to, I don't know, are you, Shannon, were you finished speaking? I didn't want to.
I am finished speaking, other than to say, I'll leave my email here so that if anyone wants to talk about writing, I'll put it in the group chats for folks to email me because I'm always here to talk about fiction as well. So I'm just going to pop my email in there. So that
I just I just wanted to say that your speech was very um insightful, and I like the it's so crazy because I guess yeah, we're at the end now, so after this is just me rambling about closing. So I guess we can open it up to free conversation if you guys want, but we've had a pretty um I would say pretty stellar list of speakers today, but not just like any speakers. Like I feel like you all spoke from a very unique place. And you really offered something that we haven't heard all day, which is really nice. And I thank Dana for extending the invitation, and I hope that this experience allows us to connect some more because I would love to know more about you and work with you more in the future. But yes, that is, I just want to give you your kudos, your 10, just because that was amazing.